All right, let's talk about something absolutely fundamental to React: props. Seriously, if you want to build professional grade applications, you have to master them. So let's really dig in and break down what they are, how they work, and why they're so important.
So think about it for a second. The whole idea of React is to build your user interface out of these small, independent, reusable components. You can think of them like little islands. But if they're all just separate islands, how do they actually communicate? How do you get them to, talk to each other? Well, the answer to that big question, it's props. This is the core solution, the primary way React lets us connect those islands and turn them into a fully functioning archipelago.
At its core, the definition is actually super simple. Props, which is just short for properties, is how you pass data from a parent component down to a child. That's it. It's a one-way street for information, always flowing downhill.
And this right here is probably the best way to think about it. Imagine your React component is just a plain old JavaScript function. The props are the arguments you pass into that function, and the UI that it spits out, that's its return value. It's a simple, predictable contract. You give it the same stuff, you should always get the exact same UI back. And this is why props are such a game changer. They make our components dynamic and reusable. You can pass down anything you want, a string of text, a number, even a whole function. This means you can build one generic card component and then use it all over your app to show a user profile, a product, or an article just by feeding it different props each time. Okay, so if you want to use props like a pro, there are basically two golden rules you absolutely have to live by. And I'm not kidding, these aren't just suggestions, they're baked into the very fabric of React to keep your app stable and predictable.
And here they are, side by side. First, data flow is always unidirectional, top down, parent to child. That's the only way. And second, props are immutable. That's a fancy way of saying they are read-only. A child component can look at its props, it can use them, but it is never, ever allowed to change them.
So you might be asking, why? Why such a strict one-way street? Well, it all comes down to predictability. When a bug pops up in your UI, this rule makes your life so much easier. You can trace the data down a single, clear path from the top of your app. It makes debugging 1,000 times easier than if data was just flying around and changing from all directions. Okay, so what about that second rule? Why can't props change? This goes right back to that component as a function idea. If a child could just reach out and change the props it was given, it would cause chaos. It'd be like a function secretly changing its own arguments, leading to all sorts of weird, unpredictable side effects. By making props read-only, React guarantees that the parent component is always the single source of truth.
All right, this is a big one. This brings us to probably the number one point of confusion for pretty much everyone learning React. What in the world is the difference between props and state? They both hold data, they both affect what's on the screen, but they are totally different beasts.
The easiest way to break it down is like this. Props are external. They are data that is handed down to a component from its parent. State, on the other hand, is internal. It's data that a component owns and manages all by itself. Now, this table really gets into the nitty-gritty, but here's what you really need to zero in on. Props are for communication between components. State is for managing data inside a single component. And here's the kicker. Props are read-only, but state is designed to be changed. That one difference is absolutely crucial. And this is where it all comes together. It's kind of magical, actually. A parent component holds some data in its own state, which it's allowed to change. When that state updates, React re-renders the parent, and it passes that new, updated value down to its child as a fresh, read-only prop. That's the reactive heart of React right there. So this whole one-way street thing is great until it's not. In really big, complex apps, it can create some tricky situations. Let's look at how to solve this data maze, like a total pro. Okay, first problem, and it's a big one. If data only flows down, what happens when a child component, like a button, needs to tell its parent that something just happened? How in the world does it send a message back up the component tree?
The solution is actually super clever. It's a pattern that uses the very tools we've been talking about. The parent creates a function, then it passes that function down to the child as a prop. The child doesn't need to know what the function does, it just calls it when something happens, like a user clicks on it. And when it calls that function, it can pass data back up as an argument. It's brilliant.
All right, on to the next headache, something called prop drilling. This happens when you have data way up at the top of your app that's needed by a component buried deep, deep down. To get it there, you have to pass that prop through every single component in between, even if they couldn't care less about it. It's just messy, you know? It's inefficient, and your code becomes a real pain to refactor later on.
So, to get around this, React gives us a fantastic tool, the Context API. Think of it like creating a special data channel. A parent component way up top can provide a value into this channel. Then any child component, no matter how deep it is, can just tap into that channel and consume the value directly. It completely skips all the components in the middle. It's like teleporting data.
Okay, we've talked about how props move through our app, but how do we make sure we're passing the right kind of data in the first place? This is where prop validation comes in, and it's a huge part of writing professional, solid code.
So, back in the day, the go-to tool for this was a library called prop types. It would check your props while the app was running in the browser. But today, the modern professional standard is TypeScript. It does the checking before your code even runs, when you're building your app.
And look, the difference might seem small, but it is absolutely massive in practice. With prop types, you'd get a warning in your browser's console after something already went wrong. With TypeScript, you get a big red error in your code editor that stops you from even building the app. It stops bugs in their tracks before they even have a chance to exist.
And really, this isn't just about switching libraries. It's a total shift in mindset for the whole community. We've moved from being reactive, seeing a warning and then fixing a bug, to being proactive, where our tools prevent us from writing the bug in the first place. Okay, so let's boil this all down. What are the key things you absolutely need to walk away with? 1. Props are for one-way data flow, parent to child. 2. Props are read-only, you can't change them. 3. To send data back up, pass a function down as a prop. 4. To avoid that messy prop drilling, use context. And 5, to build like a pro, use TypeScript to validate your props before you even run your code. And that brings us to a final question I want you to ask yourself the next time you're coding. Are your props just a lazy way to pass some data around? Or are you using them thoughtfully to design an application that's predictable, easy to debug, and truly robust? Because that, right there, is the difference.